Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeremy, and I'm really delighted to be able to present at the DDP conference. I'm going to just forewarn you, buckle up. I'm going to go through a lot of material at warp speed. I normally have twice the time to present what I'm going to be presenting right now, which is why I'm coming back at 5:15, because I know as a tennis player that just because I've been taught how to hit a slice backhand doesn't mean I know how to hit a slice backhand, and it takes a lot of practice. So for people who want to come back and practice with me on some of the pricklier issues that we have to respond to, I will be here. I also, hopefully, I've got for you 3 handouts that Jeremy has put in different colors. 6 Powers of Persuasion, I'll be referring to that a lot, and we'll be going through them one by one toward the end of my presentation. And then I always encourage people, when you start to talk to someone, start with why. You're going to understand why. There's a handout, the blue one for that. And then finally, I've written some persuasive messaging on 3 prickly false narratives about oil and gas, which follow the Engage to Win 6 Powers of Persuasion. So with that, I want to start out by thanking Dr. Orient and Jeremy for all your efforts to, and they are too numerous to account for bringing us here and for being so organized and so attentive to all the speakers' needs. I don't know about you guys, but when I told people I was going to a conference in Las Vegas, at first people laughed and then they scoffed. I have the advantage of having the COVID antibody, so people didn't scoff too long with me. But I want to give you guys a round of applause. I want to just acknowledge what a significant effort it was normally just to put on a conference, never mind in the face of all these COVID obstacles. So thank you. And I also want to thank the audience because you're here because you believe in the mission, or what was presented to us as the name of this conference, Recovering America's Heritage, Health, and Science, all of which are under assault right now. We've heard a whole morning about that. And I thank you for coming here to become more, better equipped in order to be able to defend against those core American values. And I'm reminded of that movie that came out at the beginning of the year. It seems like an eon ago, the movie 1917, which is about a young British soldier who's missioned to go through the front lines to inform a fellow regiment of a German trap. And through this progression of the film, you follow his evolution into this wily, survive at all costs missionary to save lives and save our way of life. And really, that's what we're all here about today. We're here to save lives and our way of life. And so I applaud you for being here and for hopefully going beyond this conference to do exactly that. And so what I'm going to share with you today are the strategies that I have developed. I call the workshop Engage to Win. A lot of people think that means I'm going to teach you how to win debates or talking points. I train candidates for office and they think it's about winning elections. But really what it's about is winning a better future for humanity, because when our ideas and values and principles and policies prevail, humanity wins. And America is proof of that. We are the freest, most prosperous, most decent, most fair society in human history. And so what we're going to learn right now are some strategies for advancing those ideas and thereby advancing human flourishing. And so you're going to learn how to think, act, and communicate more persuasively and more winsomely. That's embedded in the 6 Powers of Persuasion. And I'm also going to encourage you to distinguish between what I call hostiles. They're the people who we talk the most about and are concerned the most about, but they can't be converted. They can only be powered down. But the low-hanging fruit for us and the largest plurality, apart from the friendlies, are what I call the persuadables. They're the people who live busy lives. They are not in this room. They would never be in this room. They don't care as much about the issues, but we can reach them if we approach them the right way. Because one of the things I learned, if you read my bio, you'll see I wrote a column in Aspen, Colorado, and what I learned is that if you approach people the right way, my column was called Think Again, You Might Change Your Mind. And I learned that if you approach people the right way, not only will people think again, but often they will change their mind. So with that, I'm going to start by referring to the paper that I think we all got in our folders when we checked in. It was a paper that was written by Dr. Jane Orient, and last weekend I started doing a little research on DDP and I found this paper. And I have to tell you, when I saw the title, A Perspective on SARS-CoV-2, the most dangerous virus in history, I thought to myself, am I going to the right conference? And I was a little worried. I read the entire paper and I found it as powerful as it is subtle. And I'm putting the conclusion up there because I think it well frames what I'm going to try to talk about, what I think we're all worried about. I've got to come around and read this. Response to the COVID-19 pandemic is revealing that a virus much worse than SARS-CoV-2 is proliferating wildly in our population, threatening the existence of our constitutional republic. Fear and guilt have apparently overcome our resistance to the totalitarian virus. The pretext of science and evidence-based medicine is masking authoritarianism that disregards, discredits, and attempts to cancel methods that could save thousands of lives threatened not just by COVID-19, but by many other diseases, both old and emerging. And I thought that when we first talked about my coming to present at this, I was going to just focus on how to talk about issues like climate change and renewable energies. Those are the vexing issues that I know have preoccupied people over the years who come to this conference. But I decided to change my title to Talking Science in Our Era of Politicized and Weaponized Science. So with that, I first want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. I want to check our premises. First, I want to just determine, do you agree with me that our American values and principles are the best for the most people, especially the most vulnerable? Is there anyone here who disagrees with that? Okay, good. Now, secondly, premise two, that progressivism actually devastates the very people it purports to help. Anyone disagree with that? No? Okay, good. Now, here's the conundrum. Why is it that progressives get to coast on their benign intentions above the wreckage of their policies? They're the kind-hearted and we're the black-hearted. Does that frustrate you? Yes? Okay. Anyone have a conclusion as to why that is? Why are they the kind-hearted and we're the black-hearted? Yes? Okay, so you're blaming the media. Okay. Anyone else have an idea? Sorry? Okay, well, yes? Okay, so you're pointing the finger at them. Okay, well, I prefer to point the finger at us. And this is why I'm confident. This is why I hope to be the antidote to what we heard this morning from Mark. Because American history is one of people. We are created on this idea of the democratic self-rule of a free people. So here, my undeniable conclusion is, as that line from Cool Hand Luke goes, what we've got here is a failure to communicate, and we're going to learn a little bit better how to communicate in the next hour. So I want to start, when I founded Engage to Win at one of our first persuasion workshops, we had the former now president of American Enterprise Institute presenting Arthur Brooks, and I've got a couple outtakes that I'm going to play. Here's the first one.
We don't need a fundamental change in values. On the contrary, our values are correct. Our worldview is right, but we need to talk differently. We have to talk in the way that shows that we are willing to fight for people more than the other guys. Until we do that, we're not going to succeed in our message, and people are simply not going to be drawn to us. That's what I hope to share with you today. How long does it take people to figure you out? Somebody doesn't know you. You're in a debate. You're giving a speech. you're having a conversation, whatever. How long does it take people to figure out you? The answer is 7 seconds. People will assess who you are and what your message is all about. They'll sum you up. They'll put you in a frame in 7 seconds. What are you going to do? The answer is, if you want to win, you better be in charge of your 7 seconds.
How do you stay in charge of your 7 seconds? This goes to the first power of persuasion. You are the message. That you have the capacity before you've even opened your mouth with nonverbal communication cues to show people that you care, to make yourself more likable. Jack Kemp was right when he said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Because and you have to be mindful of this. It's not what you're saying, it's what people are hearing. And the goal is to establish relationships with people, even if it's just a conversation, to earn the trust of the person that you're trying to persuade. Because one of the things I learned in writing what was supposed to be an op-ed, I realized I didn't want to just express my opinion. I really wanted to persuade people. And I learned that there's a difference between actually expressing your opinion and actually persuading. And that persuasion is a journey to the common ground that people instinctively share. And I hope you'll stay with me all the way to the very end, because one of the most optimistic things I can show you is a video at the very end that I have that I wish Mark were still here to see it. I think he would be a little, oh, is he? Oh, there he is. Oh, okay, good. All right. So anyway, I also learned in writing my column, I figured I got the winning arguments. I'm just going to start putting them in writing and I'll win support. And what I realized is not so fast. First, I have to win the trust of the people I'm trying to persuade. And then they'll read my column and my winning arguments will win their support. So I'm not going to spend time on this. It's been said that we operate in a toxic political environment arrayed against us. All these social media has this cancel culture that is imperiling free speech. What hasn't been spoken about much yet is the widespread civic ignorance that we have. As Abraham Lincoln put it, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government and society in the next. You can see how what's been going on in our schools for the last decade or two is spilled out into society over the summer with, the tearing down of statues and more than that. But the good news is it's ignorance often. And I think in many cases, especially among younger people, it's ignorance that basically says they're persuadable. They've been indoctrinated, but when you can show it's in their self-interest to not think the way they do, then they can come our way. And so a case study here that messaging matters and the way you communicate matters is the fact that Andrew Cuomo's favorability ratings are at an all-time high during his governorship. Despite the fact that he's probably among the most failed of the governors, New York had so many unnecessary deaths among the elderly because of his decision making. So the point I'm trying to make is the way he communicates has made, I know there's an unfairness in the media and they want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but if you've ever watched him, he's really good at communicating compassion, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So oftentimes when I work with people, especially candidates, they talk in talking points. And you're going to see one in a moment. I'm going to show you a video. And they just assume that everyone understands why our ideas are superior. You agreed with that premise at the very beginning, that our ideas are the best for the most people. But oftentimes people don't really understand why. And what I found is that this is the shared American heritage that people look at this list, often the people that I work with, and just assume that it's partisan values. But really what I've learned is that vast majorities support these values. You just can't argue for them or articulate them in partisan ways. And the reason why they garner so much support among Americans is because they help to create the freest and fairest society in human history. And now I will tell you that I've done a talk before. The first time I did it was in Boulder, Colorado, and the talk was called Think there's no common ground in our politically polarized era? Question mark. Think again. And the goal was to show how much common ground we have. So I got to a slide like this in Boulder, and I got pushback on one of these, and I've since gotten pushback on the same one. So can you guess which one it is? In God we trust, that's right. So when I articulate it in a fairness frame, they get it. So the way I articulate it is to say, it's this idea that's embedded in our Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with these inalienable rights. We are born with them. Not a single king, aristocrat, dictator, president gives us our rights, nor can they ever take them away. And that resonates, and people understand. So I could spend more time on this, and usually do, but I'm going to keep going here. I just want to note that large majorities believe in America's founding ideas. This is a picture of Nancy Pelosi pledging allegiance to the flag in December before the impeachment hearings began. Here's an article about how the Seattle mayor invoked patriotism with regard to that autonomous zone that was set up by protesters. Now, here's the reason why Americanism is the morally superior formula for humanity. This is a chart of what I think is one of the best metrics of human well-being. It's GDP per capita. You can see that throughout most of history, going back to, I don't want to say most of history, going back to post AD history, let's call it, that poverty was the natural state. It was probably that way before, but this only goes back to the time of Jesus. So poverty has been humanity's natural state. As Thomas Hobbes put it, life was nasty, brutish, and short. The station into which you were born is the station in which you died, and you didn't have much upward mobility. But look what happens after the Enlightenment and the creation of the United States is like that proverbial hockey stick, that human well-being just skyrockets. And you can see how it has in all the other countries around the world that have adopted elements of Americanism, mostly the economic freedom. Now here, I'm going to play this because I think it's so powerful that helps you understand that if you really care about helping people, and that's my power of persuasion, number 3, the winning side always fights for people, then you should care about economic freedom.
Imagine you had to live in a country from one of these 2 lists for the rest of your life. Which list would you choose? If you're like most people, you would choose A. Let's take a look at why that is. Take Chile and Venezuela. Chile's poverty rate is half that of Venezuela's, and its inflation rate is a fraction of the size. Actually, all of List A appears to be better off than B. Look at income per person. It's 10 times higher on average in List A. But these lists aren't organized by income. They're organized by economic freedom. List A countries have the most free economies in the world. List B, the least free. Across the globe, we see a strong relationship between economic freedom and people's quality of life. For instance, people in the most free countries earn, on average, over 8 times more than people in the least free. The poor earn 10 times more. People in the most free countries are happier. They have better protected civil rights, cleaner environments, and the average person lives 20 years longer. The freest countries also have less corruption, less infant mortality, less child labor, and less unemployment. So if you care about improving people's lives, then you really care about economic freedom. And having economic freedom means your property is protected under an impartial rule of law. You're free to trade with others for what you need and want. Your money keeps its value because your national currency is stable. And government stays small relative to the size of the economy. For years, the U.S. was among the world leaders in economic freedom. But over the last decade, the U.S.'s ranking fell, and it's projected to keep falling. The question is, will our quality of life fall with it?
this was made in 2015. It's since improved. America's economic freedom standing is now much higher. But here's another chart that shows you other metrics of human well-being having to do with hunger, poverty, pollution, illiteracy, and child mortality. They've all improved since communism failed. The graph starts in 1990 with the fall of the Soviet Union. And then finally, this is just a metric that shows you as the use of fossil fuels shot up and therefore CO2 emissions shot up. That's that top left quadrant. You can see how all these other metrics of human well-being have improved with the use of fossil fuels. Okay, so what is persuasion? Normally I like to open this up to people to share stories about a time that they've been persuaded and what was it about the person that made them inclined to listen to them and be persuaded. We don't have time for that, but I'll cut to the chase. The key is that for people who are persuasive, they're generally trusted. And so in order to pick up that bullhorn, as I hope you do when you leave here, so that you can make a difference out there in the world and have credibility and impact people in your networks, you have to have credibility, and credibility comes from being trusted. And you can see here that doctors were used in the 1950s, that probably most trusted relationship of all, to actually sell cigarettes. So the problem we have right now is that we live in these thought silos where we are literally fed by social media's curated tribalism. You can turn off or unfriend someone that doesn't confirm your bias, and you can only follow the people that do confirm your bias. And so the problem is that we are forgetting this moral consensus that binds us. And so that's why we need to learn to go beyond our choir, to speak to people who think in a different way. Because when we engage to win debates by shaking our finger at people and only talking at people, they turn off. I teach a Israel persuasion workshop on college campuses, and what I've noted is that there's a survey that was done over 10 years that shows that the favorability of the Palestinian cause has, during this boycott, divest, and sanction movement, has gone up from 7 to 8% over 10 years. But the favorability of Israel has gone down 27 points during that time. And that means, by definition, the people who've dropped out of supporting Israel, they're not on the hostile side. They are, by definition, persuadables. They're like, pox on both your houses. I don't want to be in this debate. I got a test to study for. Leave me alone. And so we need a different, unique approach to go after those persuadables. And this is not it. And in fact, Stephen Covey, on whom I relied, as well as Dale Carnegie, a few other communications experts, when I started writing my column, I went to learn from the masters of communication how to approach people to have more influence and to win them over. And he was right, Stephen Covey, when he said most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They are listening instead with the intent to reply. We're thinking of what we want to say while the other person is talking. So how can they possibly feel heard? Remember, it's not what we say, it's what people hear. So suffice it to say that offending others in the way we speak is not persuasive. Normally I have lots of examples of how we often do this. I'm only going to show one example, which is probably the biggest gaffe of all, which was Romney's, when he said in 2012 that it was not his job to worry about the 47% who were dependent, entitled victims. And he cast himself as uncaring. And this gaffe was probably decisive. As you can see here in the 2012 exit polls, he trounced Obama on 3 of the 4 questions having to do with vision, values, and leadership. But on that all-important question, who cares about people like me? He was trounced 81 to 18, which means that there were Republicans who voted for Romney who thought that Obama cared more about them, which is astonishing to me. So I've got a very short clip from a debate that I've stopped. I now set this video up by telling people it's actually not an effective way to communicate. But it never ceases to amaze me how people who are in the choir think that the candidate I'm highlighting here, Karen Handel, did a good job in responding to the question. But suffice it to say, she doesn't. And I'm going to show you both her response to the question, but his response, her opponent. So she was running in a special election in June of 2017 when Tom Price from Georgia joined the Trump administration, and he had just won the seat by 23 points in November, and she was running 6 months later. She won by 5, but then in 2018 she lost. I think she's running again in that same seat. So she was running against a guy named John Ossoff, who I understand he's now running as a nominee for Senate in Georgia. So before I show you the video, I would love to have a volunteer from the audience try to answer the question, do you support an increase in the minimum wage? Now bear in mind, vast majorities, like 65% majority, support an increase in the minimum wage. It has widespread support. So is there anyone here who opposes it who would like to answer, do you support an increase in the minimum wage? Yeah. Businesses can't pay people more. Okay, because I know I'm mindful the other room doesn't have the audio, so they can't pay people. So you're making the argument that it hurts businesses. Now let me show you this response, and then I'll demonstrate how I do it, putting the 6 powers of persuasion together.
Does either candidate support a minimum wage increase? Mr. Ossoff starts with you.
Yes, I do. The minimum wage should be a living wage. I think we can raise it indexed to the cost of living, because the cost of living varies widely in urban and rural areas and in different states across this country. I think that increase needs to be implemented at a pace that allows business owners to adapt their business plans so they're not shocked. Their business plans are not shocked by a sudden increase in labor costs. But look, if someone's working a 40-hour work week, they deserve the kind of standard of living that Americans expect. That's part of the American dream, and there are too many folks who are having trouble making ends meet.
Minimum wage.
This is an example of the fundamental difference between a liberal and a conservative. I do not support a livable wage. What I support is making sure that we have an economy that is robust with low taxes and less regulation, so that those small businesses that would be dramatically hurt if you impose higher minimum wages on them are able to do what they do best, grow jobs and create good paying jobs for people in the 6th district.
Any quick feedback? Why? Why? So she was divisive at the very beginning. Instead of finding the common ground, she divided. She also said this is the difference between liberals and conservatives. Why? Why wouldn't she try to pull everyone together with finding a common ground? Anything else? Right. You give nothing away. Yeah, exactly. You give nothing. Well, but okay, I get what you're saying. Actually, I'm okay with that. She was against a livable wage, but I'm okay. A livable wage is not the same thing as being for an increase in the minimum wage. You give nothing. Your 80% friend isn't your 20% foe. So you give nothing away to say I'm for an increase in the minimum wage. But I'll come back to that point. I'm going to take this comment. Excellent. Okay. The winning side always fights for people. We've got to remember that. So, yes, so she was immediately divisive, and then she said, I don't support an increase in, this is the difference, I don't support a livable wage. And the other thing she did is she committed the same faux pas that Mitt Romney did, who always fought for job creators and entrepreneurs and business, and that's what she talked about, business. That was your inclination. But that's speaking to the choir talking points. So I'm going to now demonstrate how to put it all together, all these 6 powers of persuasion, find the common ground, the winning side always fights for people, use a fairness frame, tell a little story, and then use the rhetorical device, which in this case I'm going to use the device, I worry about. When you say, because rhetorical devices allow you to pivot away from difficult ground to common ground. And I like the device I worry about because it both shows that you care and it allows you to pivot to your people-oriented, fairness-framed, persuasive argument. So here goes. I would say, of course I believe in a livable wage. I just worry about the most vulnerable in our society, young minorities. And if they can't get a job at $10 an hour, how will they ever get a job at $15 an hour? And if they can't get their hand on that lowest rung of the opportunity ladder, how will they ever climb it to a living wage? And that's not fair. So the other thing I did there was, instead of making a declarative statement, I used a rhetorical question. I didn't say, well, someone who can't get a job at 10 won't get it at 15. I asked it as a rhetorical question. If someone can't get a job at 10, how can they get it at 15? And when you do that, you're not offending the person by telling them what to think. You're asking a question, the answer to which they then own. You've brought them to where you want them to be. So here's why persuasion matters. This was a survey that was done a year ago by Business Insider that shows that there's 63% support for the increasing the minimum wage until people learn that other people will lose jobs, and then it goes down to 37%. So here's the impact of not making a persuasive case. In 2017, when we had the opportunity to repeal and replace finally Obamacare after voting on it and winning elections from 2010 until through 2017 to 2016, elections at all levels, by making the persuasive case, you could see here that on this Pew tracking poll and the question, do Americans think it's the responsibility of the government to assure health coverage, that in 2012, for example, 60 said no and 40% said yes. By 2017, that had reversed because we stopped making the arguments and we were only talking about these parliamentary procedures that needed to take place. And then in 2018, the vexing question was having to do with pre-existing conditions. So many had voted for repeal and replace bills that did not include pre-existing conditions. I worked with Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's the congresswoman and the then conference chair of the Republican caucus, and she's the Spokane district, Eastern Washington State. And what I found, and she was polling within the margin of error in September of 2018. She pulled out an 11-point victory, but she typically won by 15 to 20. And she was vexed by this question, and in our debate prep with her, we taught her to start with why. You're going to understand why in a minute. So instead of coming out, as most politicians do, with what they're for, the policies they're for, and you know, we as sort of elites in this room, we talk about what we're for, we talk about facts, but that's not persuasive. You've got to come out with a why. Whys are things that people listen to, and they're like Rorschach tests. They sort of connect to it in whatever way they want. So what she said was, after her opponent in the first debate came at her for not supporting pre-existing conditions, she came back with a little indignation, and she said, I take offense at the suggestion that I don't support pre-existing conditions. My son was born with a pre-existing condition. He has Down syndrome. And I have worked my entire congressional career to assure that all Americans have access to high-quality, affordable health care, and right now they don't, and that's not fair. I always tell people, if you can end your argument with "that's not fair," you're persuading. So in the 25, 30 seconds that she had to respond, she never even had to talk about what. And you'll understand why that's important in a moment. And then on the Green New Deal, you can see, because we're not making a very good argument about it, you see how support that even Republicans increasingly believe that immediate action is necessary. And then this last slide here, this last chart, is on support among millennials for either socialism, 46%, or communism. Now, I will tell you, I was on a panel with Scott Rasmussen, who's a pollster, and he's polled this, and he will make the point that millennials' view of socialism is not the same as most people who were educated, let's say, before 1990, and we understand it to be like command economy or what's going on in Venezuela or obviously the Soviet Union. They actually think of socialism as equality, like in our Declaration of Independence, that we're all created equal. And in some cases, they actually think that socialism is really socializing, as in social media. So they're like way off. This goes to civic ignorance, that people are not really learning today what they need to learn. So I do want to just spend, I'm not going to spend as much time as I normally do, just talking about how to combat socialism, because after all these policies that we're against, whether it's the Green New Deal or, you know, the lockdowns or keeping kids out of school, they're all statist policies. They're all using powerful government to deprive us of our rights. So, and that's essentially what socialism is. And so I thought Thomas Sowell really encapsulated the problem well when he said that the strongest argument for socialism is that it sounds so good. And the strongest argument against it is that it doesn't work. So our mission is to be able to explain to people who don't know yet how bad socialism is, how it hurts people, and how free market capitalism, or economic freedom as I like to call it, helps people. That's what we need to do. This has been dealt with. One of the points I like to make about the climate agenda is it's really either about advancing socialism, as was acknowledged by the guy who worked for Ocasio-Cortez. So it's either about advancing socialism and changing the economy, or it's about anti-humanism, that the planet isn't. We can't, I forget, somebody told me a good line about we can't have more people on the planet. It's anti-humanism. So here's one of the best ways I've found of depicting the advantage of capitalism over socialism. Just looking at the Korean Peninsula, you see that the South is alive and alight, and you see the North is dark and dead. There was a handout earlier today. I was reading, excellent handout about socialism, talking about whether free trade between people should be equal. Capitalism is actually based on the idea that you help other people, in return they help you. So who wants to live in a society like a socialist society that says you never have to help anyone, the government does everything for people? I mean, do you really want to live in that kind of society? And then this idea that profit, when someone makes a profit, it's usually in return for giving someone else happiness. So here is a good example of Ocasio-Cortez wearing a Movado watch, carrying a Starbucks coffee, using her iPhone. She bought all those products from corporations that made a profit in return for bringing her happiness, no doubt. And so, and here's the last one on socialism. So Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have risen to prominence on this fairness appeal. The system is rigged. A handful of a handful of rich people shouldn't run the country. No question, I agree with that. But a handful of politicians should run the country, and that resonates. That's an example of a why. It's actually on the sheet that I've handed out to you. I've got several examples of whys, which are things that you can come back. They're retorts to hostiles, or they're opening statements that you could make to engage persuadables, and they really make people think. Okay, so now we're coming into the home stretch here. What's the right way to get people to the common ground? And I love this definition of Blaise Pascal. He was a French philosopher of the Enlightenment. He said, and I think it's just a great definition of persuasion: people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they have themselves discovered than by those which have come into the mind of from others, I think is really what it should say. So it's really tapping into what people already believe. It's what I learned in writing my column, is that if I approach people the right way, if I articulated what people already believed without offending them or using labels or in any way making the hair on the back of their neck go up, that they would listen to me and that they would generally agree. And that I could also get hostiles, I could power them down. And so, to me, it's that definition really goes to Simon Sinek's insight. If you don't know who Simon Sinek is, I think his TED Talk is one of the most viewed ever. It's called Start With Why, and I commend it to you. It was, probably 10 years ago now, but in it he posits that the most inspirational and compelling speakers all communicate in exactly the same way, and it's the opposite of everyone else. They say why they believe what they believe, not what they believe. And this is what Kathy McMorris Rodgers was finally able to do. Instead of coming out with the whats, she started talking about whys. So why is your purpose or belief? And so we recommend the paradigm: start with why, then fight for people. If you have time, talk about how, but maybe don't get into the whats. And we'll learn more about that in a second. What was I going to say about, well, I forget. So, I know. So he talks in the video about Apple, and it has a compelling why, think different, and it has attracted people to its movement, not for the whats it produces, the iPhones. People don't buy just for a device. They're buying to be part of the movement that says that elegantly designed, easy-to-use devices will break up the status quo, enhance your life. He also talks about Martin Luther King, and who's up here. I like to refer to 3 different whys that I think are probably the most consequential why, actually, in human history, is embedded in our Declaration. This idea that all men are created equal, and that stimulated a movement of followers that led to the American Revolution, and eventually the Constitution and the founding of the most consequential nation in human history. 100 years later, Abraham Lincoln took that same why and recast it as government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth, this idea of democratic self-rule. And in so doing, he abolished slavery and saved the Union, saved the Republic. And then finally, 100 years later, you had Martin Luther King, who cashed that check that was issued in the Revolution, in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. I don't even need to tell you what his dream is. It's so iconic. Suffice it to say, he had a dream, he had a why, not a 5-point plan. And here's another very compelling why: Black Lives Matter. Who's going to disagree with that? Okay, so we're going to go through one by one the 6 powers of persuasion. I'm going to use a couple of examples for each one, and for those of you who want to come back later and do more skill building on how to use these techniques, we will do that at 5:15 right here. So here's the 6 powers of persuasion. I've spoken about most of these, and now I'm going to demonstrate, put it all together with my story. And so this was the spring of 2014. I was at a lunch, a birthday party lunch, and sitting across from me was a woman who happened to say that she liked Obamacare. So I will tell you that I had to stifle my 2010 self. In 2010, I was writing these counterpoints on the opinion page of the Aspen Times, and I wrote one about Obamacare. I could have told you that people would lose their insurance and their doctors, that prices would go up. May not be death panels like Sarah Palin said, but there would be rationing. But I stifled my 2010 self, and I asked a clarifying question in order to understand where she was coming from, what her concerns were, so that I could then validate it. So I said, "What is it you like about Obamacare?" And she said, "Well, I like the fact that I can keep my son on my policy until he's 26. So I happen to disagree with that particular policy. I think we could have accomplished that one thing without completely upending the entire healthcare system. But I didn't say that. I said, "I don't blame you." I wanted to validate her concern. My 80% friend isn't my 20% foe. So I said, "I don't blame you. It's hard enough for kids nowadays graduating college to get a good job, never mind a good job with good healthcare benefits." And then my pivot. I just worry about people who are in the healthcare system now, whose lives are being completely upended by all of these changes taking place. And last year, I was in the healthcare system. I had cancer, and I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York in the waiting room in October of 2013 with people who were finding out at that very moment that not only were they losing their health insurance, they were losing access to the very doctors and healthcare institutions keeping them alive. And that's not fair. And this virtue signaling woman sitting across from me sat back, and you could tell she was thinking, I thought I'm the compassionate one. And the only thing she could muster to say was, I guess you can't trust everything that politicians tell you. Which to me was a bit of a victory, because I try to convince people, and this is, Mark, my answer to you, our leaders may not be the best, but Americans, we the people, we have the ability to influence people in our networks if we go out and do it effectively, persuasively, and winsomely. So that's what the 6 powers of persuasion are about. The first one is you are the message, this idea that 50 to 90% of in-person communication is actually non-verbal. So how you, I can't read my own computer, so I've got to. So yes, how you, your body language, your facial expressions, the tone of your voice. These are the nonverbal communication cues that will make people more predisposed to like you in that first 7 seconds that Arthur Brooks talked about. So you want to use what I call I hear you body language. So smile. I will tell you, when I was in New York that month of October of 2013, I tested this on the sidewalks of New York City. And even in New York City, when I would smile at people walking past me, they would smile back at me, even New Yorkers. And that's because when you smile at someone, it causes a chemical reaction in their brain, making them predisposed to liking you. So smile. Use eye contact. Head nods. When people are nodding as I'm talking, it makes me feel validated. Open posture. There's a TED Talk about people who have open posture are perceived as more confident and are more trusted. Connecting gestures. So I hasten to add now, in the post-Me Too era, not to be too much like Bill Clinton, you men out there, with those connecting gestures, but they can be effective. And then obviously no contemptuous body language. So no rolling the eyes, no crossed arms, pursed lips, finger pointing. What's that last one? I can't see it. And no furrow brow. Yeah, no furrow brow. Okay, so the second one is the power of inhabiting common ground. So we've talked about starting with why, and I don't know why I can't see my own computer here. It's so small. So we've talked about starting with why, ask clarifying questions that are open-ended. So here's a Stephen Covey thing. Find what's right with what someone is saying, not just what's wrong. So you will see in the persuasive messaging that I have, and we can test this in a moment when we're going to practice, that the persuasive messaging, that when someone says something to you, rather than coming back and disagreeing with it, try to find what's right with something that they're saying to earn their trust. Words matter, so avoid labels. You can tell, I hope you can tell, I've tried to minimize the extent to which I use labels, because sometimes, different words mean different things to different people. So why use a label that is going to make someone less inclined to listen to you because they don't want to be attached to that label? I also recommend citing sources that they would trust, not just ones that you would trust. So when I was writing my column, for example, I would cite Jonathan Turley. This goes back way back when President Obama was president. Not even, he's been amazing recently. But he actually said that as an Obama supporter, a supporter of his policies, that President Obama had become the very danger that the Constitution was designed to prevent. When you can cite, I call them righteous liberals, when you can cite righteous liberals, that's very powerful. And so then you see, and then use humor. Yep. So, and here's one of Stephen Covey's 7 powers, or 7 habits of highly effective people. Seek first to understand, and then second to be understood. And if you do it in that order, you will be understood, assuming you're not talking to a hostile. I'm not saying this works with hostiles. And then begin with the end in mind. Maya Angelou had it right, that people will forget what you said and did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So you want to be sure that you're amenable and not adversarial, gracious, not argumentative, thoughtful, not, not forceful, and grease things with positivity. I don't blame you. It's what I said in my example. I don't blame you for wanting your kid to be on your insurance policy. And so I like to make this point that if Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural address just before the end of the Civil War and before he himself was assassinated, could stand before an audience of people that included people who still either supported slavery or owned slaves and say, with malice toward none, with charity for all, that we should be able to look at people with whom we disagree with that same kind of grace. So this will come, I'm going to come back this afternoon for people who want to practice this, but let's just take this one example. This was a recent tweet, as an ER doc on the front lines, I've seen this virus kill hundreds firsthand. I've called families and delivered bad news and tears. COVID will rip through schools indiscriminately, killing teachers, kids, parents, and support staff like it has the past 6 months, resulting in 165,000 dead. And this is in response to a tweet by Representative Andy Biggs that was actually encouraging the idea that kids go back to school. So if you were going to practice coming out with something that is uniting or trying to validate validate a concern that's being expressed, what can you say that's right about what that tweet says? Anyone? Find something that's right about what they're saying? Okay. No, but you don't want people to die either. Nobody wants people to die. We don't want people to die from COVID, and we don't want people to die because they didn't get the treatment that they needed because the hospital was closed or because they weren't diagnosed early enough with cancer, right? Okay, so third, the power of fighting for people. So this is, again, this idea that we have to identify the vulnerable who are hurt by the bad policies and fight for them. Like increasing the minimum wage hurts the most vulnerable young minorities, right? And we have to identify the people who are helped by the good policies. So sending kids back to school is going to help kids continue their academic and social developmental process, right? So we're fighting for people in that sense. So you can see Democrats are great at fighting for people, the way they name the bills that they pass, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I won't name all these, but suffice it to say the biggest bill, the most important bill that was passed in the Trump administration was Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You can say they're not really talking about people. The winning side always fights for people, so Trump talked about the forgotten man. That was in his inaugural address. And Hillary talked about the deplorables. So here's just a quick video explaining what happened in the upper Midwest. Van Jones went to the upper Midwest to interview people about it.
Billionaire. I mean, you guys are serious, like the working class backbone of America and the industrial heartland. How does a billionaire break through to the blue collar work?
We put Democrats in office. And she turned around and forgot completely about us. We are what makes this world go round. We built the tanks and bombs that won these countries' wars. And for you to come through here and completely neglect us, we would have rather vote for anybody instead of her. And all the other stuff that Donald said didn't seem to make a hill of beans. She hurt us. And that's what it is.
Okay, so here's that tweet again, same tweet. If you were to respond to the ER doc here, in opposing the school closure policy, who are the vulnerable for whom you're fighting? Identify the vulnerable, who would be helped by opening schools. Okay. Yeah, we could spend time, and we'll come back at 5:15. We'll talk more about how to make these arguments, because I'm going to run out of time here. I'm going to have the hook in a second. Okay, so use a fairness and compassion frame. So this is based on, this was a slide that was in Arthur Brooks's presentation at one of our first persuasion workshops. So it's based on the work of Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Differ on Politics and Religion, I think is the subtitle. And he basically posited 5 moral foundations. These are the prisms through which people look at policy and society. And you can actually take the test. It's on his site, yourmorals.org. It's a 20 question survey, and but I'll just tell you the punchline is that there's a conservative and liberal morality. Conservatives tend to care about all 5 moral foundations about the same, and liberals are off the charts in terms of compassion and fairness. So we speak to everyone when we frame our arguments in terms of compassion and fairness. So it's only it's only conservatives that were annoyed when Miley Cyrus was twerking, or when kids were crossing the border coming into the United States, or sanctuary cities. It was only conservatives that cared that Barack Obama didn't wear a flag on his lapel in 2008. Not so much liberals. Now you see here, money is not in the Venn diagram, and yet we have a tendency to make so many of our arguments about money in business. But money arguments have no moral salience. They can have moral salience if you cast them in a compassion or fairness way. So, for example, instead of railing against unsustainable entitlements, we can argue that it's unfair that young people paying into the system now won't get their benefits when they retire. That's a fairness appeal on a money argument. So I'm not going to play this, Arthur Brooks. And here's the same tweet. Can we make a compassion or fairness appeal to argue for opening schools? Anyone? It's only fair that parents need to work. Okay. But so we're fighting. Let's just go back to fighting for kids whose development has been arrested, who are sitting home getting addicted to videos or alcohol or drugs or any number of things. So putting them back in school is a compassionate thing, is only fair because they will be back socializing and back in an environment where they're going to learn, where their development won't be arrested any longer. That's only fair. That's only compassionate. There are kids whose only decent meal in a day is at school. That's not fair to keep them home. There are kids who at home don't get the attention from parents that they need in order to learn at home. That's not fair. Do you see what I'm doing? Okay. All right. And now 5th is the power of story. I normally like to pull stories out of the audience that can be used to make arguments, but this is a hard picture to look at. But the point is, as Stalin said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. If you don't know this picture, it's of the little 3-year-old Syrian boy who washed up on a Turkish beach in September of 2015. His family was fleeing the Syrian civil war. That had been going on for years. Hundreds of thousands had died. There had been several gas attacks up until that point. Nobody cared. Then this picture goes viral. And suddenly, at least in Europe, there was an upwelling of support and the change in migration policy in Europe to the point now where they're actually having to change things back. Picture paints 1,000 words. Stories matter. Stories stimulate the heart. Okay, 6, the power of pivoting to common ground. We've talked about this. Your 80% friend is your 20% foe. So using these rhetorical devices I've been talking about, I worry that, shows you care, allows you to pivot to your persuasive argument. And then asking rhetorical questions instead of making declarative statements. Also asking people to imagine. Imagine, as I put it in the 6 powers of persuasion, imagine is helps people go from where they are to where you want them to be. So I wrote a column about the Baltimore riots years ago, and I said, instead of railing against the the municipal authorities, which everyone else was doing, saying they caused the problem, I tried to make a fairness and compassion appeal. I said, to imagine that it was a miscarriage of justice and the civil rights struggle of our time, that there are pockets of destitution where and poverty where millions are deprived of the dignity and fulfillment of work. And imagine if we could reverse that. Imagine if we could institute policies, and that was what the column was about, was what those policies could be. Okay, so here is what I hope will, Mark is now gone, will give you all hope. This is a video taken in February of last year, after Ocasio-Cortez came out in favor of the Green New Deal. And Cabot Phillips from Campus Reform went to the University of Miami to interview a lot of kids there about the Green New Deal. It had just come out. People knew very little about it. The reason I'm showing you this is the power of asking people to check their premises, to ask them the questions about whether or not they indeed support things. And you can see, I'm not showing you the whole thing because it's too long to show. I've truncated it, and I've cut off the part in the beginning where, without exception, every one of these kids says they support the Green New Deal and that they're progressives. So you'll see one last one says that, and then he goes on to ask about 3 elements of the Green New Deal. And when you listen to these kids, you're going to think that they came out of your home. So watch this and have hope.
Anything that would reduce our dependence on fossil fuels is really important.
I definitely support this movement.
Some of the things in the plan I want to get your opinion on. So the plan says within 10 years, we're going to completely outlaw coal, natural gas, and oil. So gasoline, anything like that in 10 years.
I don't agree with that. To be honest with you, I think we need those things to live.
I do not think it is feasible in 10 years. I don't think that would be something that would be able to be done in such a short amount of time.
I think 10 years is a little extreme because I feel like there's such a big global market and economic impact of oil businesses, albeit it might not be good for the environment, but you can't deny there's a big economic impact of these companies.
What's your thought on that?
Sounds like a reach, honestly.
Do you think that's feasible?
No.
If you're unwilling to work, we will still supply help for your salary and help for a living wage.
No, absolutely not.
If you're not willing to contribute to society, I don't think that the people who are contributing should pay for you. So I disagree with that.
I feel like it kind of sends the poor message of, you can just get away with not doing anything and, getting money. It's kind of stupid.
I don't like that personally. Unwilling isn't the best way to go about things. Like, I don't want to go to college, but I have to get a job, so.
Everyone needs to contribute. That's the only way society works.
I don't know about that one. I think that if you're unwilling, that I don't know if you should receive money for that.
If you didn't want to go to class, if you were unwilling to go to class, should I still give you a good grade?
No. Yeah, like people definitely need a job and need to work.
Eliminating almost all air travel with high-speed rails. What's your thought on that?
I feel like it's kind of the same one. It's like I feel like 10 years is a little extreme for that.
I don't think it should be eliminated altogether. I think it's definitely, it can be an option. I think the more options we have, the better.
I think that's drastic. I haven't heard of that one yet.
Yeah, I can't see that happening either, honestly.
We've come so far to get to this point where we are right now with using these resources, and to say, oh, we have to get rid of it in 10 years seems a little too much to me.
Who's going to pay for all of it? Who's going to offset the trillions of dollar cost that it would be?
Right. I don't know.
Okay.
Nobody knows. Like, it's kind of like who's really going to pay. I don't, like.
Based on what you've heard from these, does it change your perception of the plan at all?
Yeah, a lot.
Sometimes you need to take extreme measures to save the environment, but I don't think that is I think it's a bit too extreme.
It doesn't sound like something I would be behind.
I don't agree with us having to, take away flying in the air. I don't agree with, taking away coal and things like that, and I don't agree with everyone getting money for doing nothing.
Feel a little better, maybe, just a little. Just
Anything
a little.
that would reduce our dependence on fossil.
That was the University of Miami in February of last year. All right, I'm going to close. I'm going to close by saying that though we often feel beleaguered, believing what we believe, believing in the truth and in science and health and the American heritage and seeing them under assault, we feel beleaguered, especially at election time. I hope I've persuaded you that we inhabit the moral high ground. The truth is on our side. And so can public opinion if we make the effort to engage people persuasively and winsomely. And the concern that so many of us have right now is we know as Americans we are the luckiest people to have ever inhabited this planet. And the question that we have and the concern that we have is, will our children and their great-great-great-great-grandchildren be able to say the same thing? And yes, it's up to our leaders, but it's also up to us. That's the American idea we are founded on, the democratic self-rule of a free people. So I want to send you out to be more persuasive as you engage with people out there, to persuade them of our morally superior formula for humanity. I want to send you out with a brief prayer. Help us remember the rich American past we have inherited, and make us ever mindful of the bright American future we must secure and enrich. And may the memories of cherished leaders which guide our actions inspire us to live lives worthy of remembrance. Thank you.